All right. Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Hope you had a great weekend and Mother's Day. Welcome to the Building Outdoor Communities Spring Webinar Series. This is our third one this season. We have one more coming up in June for this round. The subject, we're so excited. I think this is a hot topic, definitely a hot topic across the region and the nation and state right now. Investment ready, funding your outdoor project. And we have some very special guest speakers who some of you may have seen. And at the launch event last September, we have Spencer Finch, the principal of Alta Planning Plus Design, and Kimberly Williams, the senior planner. So we're really excited, and thank you, Kimberly and Spencer, for being here. And we're really excited to learn from you. So I'll turn it over to you, and we will all just be here. And if you wouldn't mind muting yourself for this time being, but if you have questions, you can use the raise your hand feature, or you could use the chat feature. And Kim said that we could take some questions during. There'll also be some time at the end for questions.
Yeah, so there's like a little raise your hand icon if you see the bar where you're muted and everything. So you could use that, or we'll scan the chat. So I'm excited to be here. It's good to see a lot of you. We're happy to have this conversation today. I think this is a really timely one for a lot of reasons, and we'll share some of those reasons. Is everyone seeing my presentation okay? Fred, good? Okay. So this was really about funding your outdoor community projects, focusing on infrastructure projects. There's lots of other kinds of great projects you could do, like activation of your outdoor spaces and different things. So that's what we'll focus on today. So the goals are really to learn about the different opportunities funding outdoor infrastructure projects. And I think I'm excited to learn from some of you. So we're gonna have folks share what they know about and talk effectively as a group and use the hive mind to get a better understanding of that. So about us, Alta, we are a planning and design firm that focuses on place-based solutions. We're known for active transportation, but also do outdoor recreation planning and design. And we love doing community engagement as well, and our funding experts. So I would say you have Spencer on the call, which is one of, I think, probably one of the most knowledgeable funding experts for federal grants of anyone I know. He has lots of experience helping raise millions of dollars for different grants. We also have been doing a lot of federal grants lately. I come from a background of parks and recreation and conservation planning, working to lead regional conservation and recreation efforts, where I was probably more on your end, where I was trying to get a lot of grants and actually managing a grant program. So I feel your pain in finding grants. And Spencer does as well, because he led an environmental organization. Spencer, you want to just say hi to folks and mention your background?
Hi, y'all. So I'm Spencer, principal with Alta. I have 25 years of experience. I'm an engineer, but I did take a detour in my career where for 8 years I was a director of a statewide environmental nonprofit in Pennsylvania, where we helped.
Well, that's you, Sandy, and
Would be fine.
I'm not Sandy.
Where we help the state and many communities across the state do a lot of parks and trails, and eventually we helped create the circuit, the regional trail network in Philadelphia and surrounding communities. So been back in engineering for many years now, and here in North Carolina, where my family is from, and trying to make it happen here as well. It's exciting to be here, exciting to see all the amazing work that you all are doing throughout the state.
So as we kick this off, I wanted to mention that we're in a period of unprecedented funding for outdoor recreation projects and gateway communities. I'm glad Amy Allison used that term. I think gateway communities is a good way to think about any community you live in, because we are so completely surrounded by public lands. And not only should we be thinking about within our communities outdoor recreation projects, but connecting to that tremendous asset of public lands. So we're going to kind of cover all different ways to consider building outdoor recreation projects within our communities and within those big public land tracts. So the different types of unprecedented amount of funding, including both federal and state and local, we're seeing a huge trend, especially in local. So we'll talk about that, but federal funding is something that I think a lot of folks have a hard time getting their head around because it is so much money right now available for the next few years through the infrastructure bill, especially a lot of funding for trails and active transportation projects. And we'll go over some of those today. The Great American Outdoors Act was passed, I think, a year and a half or more ago. And that is really releasing a lot of funds to federal land management agencies to address deferred maintenance, but also do a lot of capital projects. So if you are a partner that works with federal lands and you don't know about this, I would definitely talk to your partners. They have a lot of planning that they're doing right now and beginning to implement some of those projects. There's also a lot of funding right now through North Carolina, and thanks to trail partners throughout the state. Maybe some of you here were involved in some of the advocacy work, but we're really looking at unprecedented amounts of funding for trails, especially paved trails. So through NCDOT, they have implemented the Great Trail State Plan, which also was involved helping lead. And the priority right now is to help fund those projects, but there is definitely funding available to anyone. And then a lot of local partner funding. So I would say that tourism development agencies, or TDAs, have become one of the biggest funders for outdoor projects in Western North Carolina. So becoming good friends with your TDA representatives is key, as well as foundations, business partners, friends groups. If you don't have a friends group, I would recommend trying to grow one that can help you with your local match for funds. So we're going to do a quick poll real quick to understand what kind of projects you're most interested in. Brad, if you want to put the poll up. So we're going to ask you, what type of project are you most interested in? And you might be interested in a few, but we're going to ask you to select one now so we kind of understand what this audience is interested in. Go ahead and take that poll. It should have popped up. Great to see there's a high interest in trails. We can definitely help you with that, understanding the climate for trail funding right now. Land acquisition, that can be a challenging one. There's fewer pots of money for land acquisition, so I can help you understand that. Great. Well, we'll end the poll now, and we'll have more of a chance to talk through some of these. We'll share the results right now. All right, Brad, do you know how I stop? I just unshare.
Is it gone?
I think it's gone. Does everyone see the poll still? Or is it gone? Okay, good.
Okay, good.
All right.
Thanks, Al.
Yeah, thank you. So it's helpful to know, and we will focus quite a bit on trails and active transportation today. All right, so some of you might be experts in some of this, so I wanted to be able to speak to everyone though, in case some folks don't have a full understanding of the life cycle of getting funding for different projects. So we'll address that quickly. Essentially, when you're starting a big project or a vision for something, you want to do some type of plan for it, whether it's a master plan, a feasibility study, or concept plans being for like smaller scale areas. This will really help you work with partners to understand, like, how will you build partnership capacity for these projects? What does it look like on the large scale? How do you get funding for it? And then it can do a high level planning level cost estimate, which is really important for your grant application. And then when this is done, part of that critical process of planning can be engaging those partners that you want to fund, want to have help fund the project. So I always tell folks that planning is really a marketing sales piece to others, and to try to, look at who might be interested in funding them and funding this project and actually getting those partners to the table in the planning process. Once you have your plan done and local partners starting to commit to matches, you can do a fundraising campaign, but ultimately when you go to apply for the grant, get that awarded, then that's really when you're obligated to get some stuff done. And those usually include construction documents, environmental review, and permitting. And in some cases, these grants, when you apply, you actually need to show that you've done some due diligence for environmental review and stuff like that. And that includes some of the trails funding we'll talk about today. And then when we talk about shovel ready, that's a big term in funding, but do you have a shovel ready project? So that means that you've gotten to the point of, construction documents are very detailed plans and that your environmental review and permitting is done. So a lot of funders are really looking for you to be at this stage of shovel ready. And then I'll turn it over to Spencer to talk about strategizing for funding and then getting into some of the funding opportunities.
Thanks, Kim. So I'm going to start really at the tip, right? Look for the low-hanging fruit. So a lot of the work that you might be doing, hopefully you have more than one person, right? But might have been at a volunteer level, right? And you might have been out there shoveling and using some donated bulldozer or tractor, your neighbor's tractor, right, to clear a path for the trail. And there's some work that you can definitely do with volunteers, but you definitely want to ramp up from that, right? So the process that Kim just described is typically for a project that would take, more than a couple $1,000s, right? It'll start going up into tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions. And to do that, you need to start building up your partnerships, right? And you need to start planning in longer term timelines and a little bit more detail. What we do really is focus on prioritizing, right? What is going to be that little piece of the project or the trail segment that you can get done the easiest. You can get it done first, and it can be your early win, right? That then really jazzes everybody up and really creates more momentum for the project. And we love to sit down with folks and just try to figure out, right? Like, what is that little piece that doesn't have that red flag, doesn't have a large scale acquisition issue, right? For you all that have been involved with the project, you know that if you have to acquire land, it might take years, decades sometimes. What is that project or that piece of the project that doesn't have major environmental issues, that you don't need to address wetland mitigation, that you're not dealing with contaminated land? And utilities are always a big issue, right? Anybody who's dealt with Duke Energy or having to relocate water and sewer, it can be a very, very involved process. So you got to think even before you have a consultant engaged, right? You got to think a little bit like a planner and engineer. And then when you do secure that consultant, maybe the consultant is volunteering, or maybe you found some funding to hire somebody. We recommend that you go through the prioritization process, right? And really think about it. Start developing those concept plans where an engineer can actually develop a quality cost estimate, not just $1 million a mile. That rule of thumb has been out of date for probably over 10 years now. And really dig into what the issues are going to be to get your trail project, your park project completed. And that cost estimate at the conceptual level then will be that catalyst, right, for you to apply for all those grants. And then what we can do and help everybody with is really figure out, right, like, what are the options? What are the different avenues? Do you want to secure a smaller grant, right, to get that early win? Do you want to start building up to secure a larger grant, right? That might be a federal funding grant that then has to be managed by a public agency, a local government, an MPO, somebody with more capacity, right, to manage federal grants and deal with all that administrative burden that federal grants give you. And what you see here, the framework for implementation, this is just a sample, right, like of what we include in our active transportation plans, pedestrian plans, bike plans. We really map out, right, who has a role in helping the project be implemented and what each partner can do, right? So nonprofit partners might take the lead, local governments might take the lead, NCDOT might take the lead, land trust might take the lead, but overall, a project happens when all these actors are collaborating to make something happen. And then, just so we don't forget, right? Like you have to have a cool name and a brand. That's always helpful, right? If you can name it even before it exists, right? It'll help you market it and help you get those grants as well. So you saw the different types of projects. You were on the poll right here. So these are some of the funding sources for each different type of project, right? So if you're looking at environmental restoration, land acquisition, these are some of the sources, right? The NC Land and Water Fund, which taps the LWCF at the federal level. If you have lands in floodplains, there might be an opportunity to tap FEMA funds. There are state environmental enhancement grants. I just mentioned Duke Energy. They also have grants, right? And Partners for Fish and Wildlife, right? There are smaller scale grants that can become that initial, $20,000 grant that helps move the project along, that helps that initial planning stage, and that then becomes the basis for larger efforts down the line, and they can help you, get the deeds and figure out the property and land acquisition issues that you're facing for your project. Do reach out to the land trust. Do reach out to those that are working in this arena already, right? There might be folks in your community that are working to preserve land, to acquire land, and even if not, they have experience and might be able to give you some tips. Definitely work across silos, right? Look at your local conservation district, if you go to your government agency, folks love to be asked, right? Can I help you? They love to help if you just ask the right way. Next slide. For active transportation, Kim mentioned that there's a plethora of funding available right now. I think it's unprecedented, really, the amount of funding that's available. And the typical sources for your initial steps, right? NCDOT, the IMD division, has pushed out the feasibility studies, grants, and there's another round coming this fall. That's a great opportunity to get that initial planning step for a trail or greenway done, which would then transition to the typical federal grant, right? Like the TAP Transportation Alternatives Program would be the major source for that. But there are many other ways to skin the cat. You can really, in some cases, have NCDOT then take the lead. If they have another, a roadway improvement program, something, and the tip that's coming down the line, they might be able to incorporate segments of your project into their project. And that process would start with reaching out to them and then having your project, let's say it's along a state roadway, right? Go through the spot process and the integrated mobility division review to see if it could be incorporated into a bigger project. If not, there's always the locally administered project option, right? You can reach out to MPO and RPO typically and get the LAP funding, apply for LAP funding, and where those entities would help you throughout the process of applying and managing that grant and getting reimbursed for those. building on that, if you get a project that has a construction cost that is, let's say, between 5 million and 50 million, right? Then you need to start tapping bigger federal grant programs. And two of the ones that are the biggest right now, and most everyone is trying to tap, are the RAISE grants, right? They were previously known as Tiger or Build. They've been around since 2009. But they're the large federal grant for non-traditional transportation projects, right? For active transportation, they've been a really game changer in the amount of money that's available for projects. And there are other federal programs like SS4A is a recent one that came through IIJA, right? And it's focused on safety. Everybody has heard how transportation safety has deteriorated in the last few years through the pandemic, right? So this is a new program just focused on trying to provide grants to communities across the nation to really implement programs that hopefully can reduce injuries, fatalities to zero. There's other programs reconnecting communities, access to federal lands. There's so much federal funding available now, and that's typically for the larger dollar amount projects. Let's see. Let's go to the next. And Kim, do you want to take it from here? Yep.
Yeah, so the next slide is really going to address trails that are not paved. So typically natural surface or crushed stone trails. So the challenge with NCDOT funding or other types of DOT or federal highways funding is they don't always typically pay for unpaved trails. But the good news is there's a lot of other funding opportunities. Although I would say it's a little more challenging to find funding for planning work. But the good news is I think some of that is lower cost. So these are some of the options you can look at. The two mainstays for trails and bike parks and any kind of trail infrastructure are two programs. And if you're coming from out of state, these are similar programs in your state as well. But in North Carolina, it's Recreation Trails Program, RTP, and Parks and Recreation Trust Fund. And these do come from some federal dollars to help fund some of these programs. But the RTP program is unique in that it's just largely focused on trails. We say that it needs to be shovel ready, but it's actually somewhere in between. What I would suggest is if you need to get trails funded, get somebody to help you do a plan, a trail designer, a professional trail builder, and get something conceptual at least, or that's been verified in the field. And then that plan would need to be submitted with the application, as well as an initial screening with state agencies. And you're typically going to want to try to do an early screening with them, and then I think later in the season is when you apply. So it's you really need to start thinking early in the year for some of these projects. I would say start thinking April, February for some of this stuff. The other one that I mentioned is Park and Recreation Trust Fund, which is typically known as a funding source for parks, but they are starting to fund a lot of more outdoor recreation, nature-based outdoor projects, and especially bike parks. They've gotten an unprecedented amount of applications for bike parks, which is a big trend right now. And that will pay a little bit more for planning. So they ideally want you to have some type of master plan, park and recreation comprehensive plan, but it can be, conceptualizing the plan can be paid for through that funding source. Another really important one is private funders. So again, I mentioned the tourism development agencies. If you have a local hotel tax, you're going to want to take advantage of that, as well as private donors. I'll give an example of, there are a lot of folks who love to use trails that actually have a fair bit of money. And since unpaved trails don't cost that much money to build, I think folks are willing, to put $200,000, $250,000 down, and that actually pays for quite a bit. The other option, if you're a partner with local federal lands, and this is again through the Outdoors Act or the Public Land Legacy Restoration Fund and the National Forest System Trail Stewardship Partnership Funding Program. I know that some local sorbet chapters, mountain biking chapters. I've really worked with some of the federal partners on this. So I encourage you again to reach out to your federal partners on that and see what they have going on. Another one is local and state earmark. So, earmark in your county or city budget. And if it has a real regional impact, consider talking to your state legislatures. There's a lot of folks who are willing to help you with that. One example, and I think we have somebody representing the organization, is Mount True has helped do some advocacy work with state legislatures to help get funding, as well as some of the local land trusts. So an example is the Akusta Trail got a big earmark. And these are just, these are critical to actually get stuff like the land purchased and other major things that are harder to get funding for. Lastly, people for bike grants, they're not a huge grant, but they are a great option for local match, as they're about 10,000 K. They pay for bike and trail infrastructure as well, but it does need to have a bike component. And again, think about working with your TDAs. I know right now Asheville, Asheville Unpaved is getting funded through the local TDA, and some other examples are shared in a bit. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about blueway and lake access. So we also have a wealth of water access in our state, but unfortunately don't actually have really good access to some of them. There is a growing effort to plan and design for blueway and water access. It's a little bit harder to find planning funds for blueway access, so I'd love to hear if anyone has thoughts on what they used for that. These are some of the funding sources that are tried and true. So a lot of these are through the Department of Environmental Quality and other state programs. So there's the NC Boating Infrastructure Grant, which is largely for motorized boat access, for docks and other things like that. There's the public beach and waterfront access. So think about any place that will become a public beach, usually on lakes and things like that, has funding for improvements. This is one that the next one is the Water Resource Development Grant, and they actually have 2 rounds going on the next few years. I highly recommend. I think a lot of people could really take advantage of this call in this funding source, because it actually pays for trails, trailheads, any kind of water access. So it's actually a pretty broad funding source. It just needs to be adjacent to waterways. And then Parks and Recreation Trust Fund, again, will pay for a lot of these different elements. And the one that I think is a really cool example of a funding source that does a lot of good is the accessible fishing and boating access funding through the NC Wildlife Resource Commission. So these, anywhere where you really see probably fishing access, especially ADA fishing access, is funded through the state. And there's more information through some of the links that we have. Hey, thanks for sharing that, Jack. I figured you probably have something you could share there as far as funding for blueways.
Hey, Kim, just to mention another one that I ran across recently. Duke Energy has hydro facilities, especially out west and down into South Carolina. And for those hydro facilities, they're obligated to maintain public recreation areas. So in that case, they own the land, right? But I think there's an opportunity there that they have a set amount of funding that they have to use every year. And communities can reach out to them if you are near one of those hydro facilities to basically get, recreational facility for free. So I thought that was a really interesting one.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Spencer. That's a great example. I don't know if anybody is on McDowell County representing McDowell, but that's an example. Is their Black Bear campground that's about to be built is something funded through Duke, and they're also, I think, funding portions of the Fonta Flora Trail that connects to the campground. So that's a great option if you're not working with Duke, but you're live in a community where Duke owns a lot of land or waterways. All right, so we're going to jump to some case studies, then we're going to start talking with y'all and can answer some questions too. So we just wanted to show you that successful projects are actually like a huge blend of a lot of these, and you can get a little bit of grant fatigue and applying for stuff, but once you actually start getting a few grants, it really builds momentum and leverage, and people get excited about it. So I think I wanted to share how there's a layering of these grants and how they build momentum and are catalysts for other grants. So the first one is the Asheville River Arts District and the whole riverfront revitalization project that has been ongoing for many years and continues to go. Riverlink was a huge one to get that project started. The city of Asheville and a lot of other partners have been involved. So some of the grant sources we've already talked about. The Accessible Fishing and Boating Access Fund actually funded this dock, which is really neat. It's a dock that folds up during flood events. So if you ever see it folding up, it's not broken. That's how it's meant to function. It's cool. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Partners for Fish and Wildlife. This is a program that I got to know through working with some federal partners. They're really interested in funding projects that would impact state and federal listed species. So in the case of the waterfront around Asheville, the rusty patch bumblebee is a listed species and their habitat is disappearing. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife worked with Asheville Greenworks to start implementing these pollinator pocket parks or pocket gardens. And a lot of volunteers, including me, helped implement some of these. So, it's something to think about. It's just a conservation overlay and how you can apply for grants to help with that. Duke Energy actually paid for a planning grant as part of that to come up with a plan around the whole revitalization riverfront plan to see how we could ecologically upgrade the whole area, including some of the park systems. So actually the pollinator pocket parks came out of that plan. And then the TDA funded a huge chunk, as well as a Tiger federal grant. And again, that's basically what the the rates, that's meant to say RAISE grant is now. So that RAISE grant typically, there is a planning option, but again, if you're looking for bigger multi-million-dollar projects, consider RAISE. Example of a planning grant that we recently helped with is the Haywood County Greenway Plan, and that was funded through Federal Highways Program, but really it was achieved through the French Broad River Metropolitan Planning Organization and Haywood County pursuing those funds. So there is a lot of planning options for active transportation out there, or funding options for that. And you can read actually more about some funding options in this plan. There's a link, and I'm actually going to send you this presentation at the end so you can have access to all these links. And then lastly, this is a project I was involved in that's still ongoing, but the Chestnut Mountain Nature Park that was led by the town of Canton and Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy. And this is a tremendous example of so many grant sources that were awarded. And some of those include, there's a whole list of all the funding sources. One big one too that we didn't mention is the NC Attorney General Office's Environmental Enhancement Grant Program. There's local foundations that help pay for some of this. And RTP, so some of the trails funding also was funded through a private donor, a guy named Seth with Seth Bike Tax, who's a YouTube channel kind of star. And so he helped pay for the bike park element itself. And there was also the North Carolina Land and Water Fund is currently paying for some environmental restoration work. And so I think I saw Alex Smith, shout out to him. He actually was an author in some of the RTP funds that were awarded. So a lot of that is actually being built, additional trails right now. It's pretty exciting. So with that, we'll turn it over for any questions. If you want to, just something that's on your mind right now, or we'll go into an interactive session with you all. Any questions? Jack, I wanted to give you a second to talk about your strategic master plan, because I think that's really neat. Can you talk about how it was funded and what it basically contained?
Sure. Can y'all hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I work for a nonprofit called Mountain True here in Western North Carolina, and we are the state lead partner for the Finch Paddle Trail. And so the project I'm going to talk about here that Kim mentioned is actually slightly separate from that involvement, but we're working on implementing that plan. And so in the past, Transylvania County, it's one of our it's headwater counties on the French Broad River, one of 4 counties that the main stem passes through here in North Carolina. And for a long time, Transylvania County is known for its trails, large part of Pisgah National Forest, DuPont State Recreational Forest, gorges, Blue Ridge Parkway, etc. But the river has been a longstanding resource recreationally in the region. And so the county TDA has this pretty unique program called Transylvania Always. And they use a portion of their head and bed tax dollars to pay for sustainability and access improvements and stewardship for their natural resources. So trail projects or invasive species projects or blueway projects. And so for a long time, they've tried to fund improvements to the waterway here in the county, but we're having trouble kind of project managing those one-off. So they decided to partner with a land trust, Conserving Carolina here in Henderson and Transylvania County to fund this plan. And so myself kind of subcontracted as an independent contractor back then, this was several years ago, to put that together, basically to create a menu of projects that the TDA could help fund in the future. And so they would, obviously they don't have the funds to, do 6-figure projects, but they can match things in terms of site-specific design, or one-off improvements like picnic tables and signage and things like that, or kind of help provide some guidance alongside connections with land managers and things like that. So, there's like a kind of slower 5-figure plan altogether, but it gave them a menu of projects that they could help implement going forward. And so now in my role here on the paddle trail, we're kind of the lead partner for implementing that. So I have this checklist of things I can go to or go through. It's kind of pre-approved at the county level, and they can take that moving forward. So I would say the unique thing with that is that the county TDA has been pretty liberal with how they interpret their TDA funding. A lot of TDAs have these like pretty rigid categories for how they spend their money, and there are rules around that in terms of 2/3, 1/3, things like that. But they've been pretty open to funding projects that kind of fit a wider range of tourism impacts, and that was a key factor here.
Thank you, Jack. That's really helpful to know. I also wanted to mention in our little tips sidebar, when I send this presentation to you, the link that it includes a Developing Blueways Guide, which I find to be really helpful. It gives you a lot of advice on, starting early in the planning process and things you should be considering. So keep that in mind. So with this, we're gonna go ahead.
Sorry, this is Jackie. I was just going to mention, one of the key partners in this project, putting the Blueway plan together, was the National Park Services Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program, and kind of RTCA for short. And if y'all are not familiar with them, I encourage you to look into them. They provide grants of their time, so it's not money in hand, but these are National Park Service regional planners and conservation assistance folks that can help kind of in kind put together plans that can be utilized, to seek funding down the road. So if you don't have the cash in hand to, hire a planner per se initially, this can be a way to kind of, get some regional things put together. So just a plug for that program. They work really well with local partners and contractors.
I'm really glad you mentioned that. I think they're a great partner to get folks launched. They do really amazing strategic planning processes. The other, couple of grants that I didn't mention, but I think that are worth considering is the Blue Ridge National Heritage Area has a grant to fund natural resource and cultural resource heritage tourism. So they will pay for some infrastructure type stuff. So I would check out their grant, kind of a catch-all for a lot of things, as well as Dogwood Health Trust used to fund what they call catalyst grants, which is working with grant writers to write grants to get other grants. So that may still be ongoing. We have a question from Joanna. Are there known grants that help with brick and mortar? So we have civil engineer plans for a picnic shelter, Jackrabbit, and 4 services on board, but we can't find funding. So Joanna, I think that the part of the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund will pay for that. One other thing that I've seen very common is any kind of civic association. So if you have forgetting the different names of them, but Rotary clubs and different things. Rotary clubs have funded so many park shelters on projects that I've worked for. It's kind of crazy. the only way I really know them. But you know, there also might be you know, some funding through the Outdoor Recreation Act if you can poke around there. But those are a few things that come to mind. Does anyone else have any ideas for funding picnic shelters? You can throw it in the chat if you want. If you would like to, let's do more of the interactive session. Feel free to turn your camera on. We'd love to see your faces. There is a link that we'd like you to go to, and I'll show you how you can engage with this link. Oh, hello, good to see some faces. So this is a link that's similar to what we sent you. And how you use this is called Jamboard. Is you can toggle back and forth through. So at the very top, there's a little page, and if you expand it, you know, it will show you the different pages. So you can go through these different pages and provide feedback on some opportunities that you know about. We'd really love to use this time, create that hive mind sharing experience, and we'll take you through each of them. Once you click on the pages, you can actually type in these little sticky notes and provide your thoughts on what are successes you've had with some of these funding sources. So again, look in the chat, and I sent you a link to this link. So first of all, what we were going to ask you, and feel free to unmute yourself and just have the conversation as well, is what is the biggest challenge you've had in getting to shovel ready, to getting to the point of applying for funds? Joanna, maybe I'm going to pick on you because I know you a bit. Can you tell us about your project and the challenge you're having?
Well, we've looked at the PARTF, the PARTF, and it seems like it's a point system, and it didn't look like we would have many points. And it's difficult because our county took over the travel and tourism board. They took over the economic development. We've been really good in the past as far as the community coming together and doing, you know, all kind of fundraising efforts and stuff. We rely on a lot of our nonprofits. But this, you know, and we've had several RTP grants to actually build Jackrabbit. We've got some other projects down the road as far as we're 99.9% completed with our bike pedestrian plan. And there's some like that low hanging, there's a short little greenway that we're very interested in pursuing in the town of Hayesville. But this picnic shelter, we're like beating our heads. We're looking at every kind of funding available, but so many. And even if we go through help and safety, because we've had events out there where major thunderstorms pop up and everybody's like under metal tents. so you know, but we've found out, you know, like Dogwood and Blue Cross, they don't do brick and mortar and stuff either. So we're just kind of beating our head against the wall.
Yeah, so I think if there is any kind of Rotary clubs or any kind of, you know, basically those types of groups, they will help fundraise for that, or at least help you get the local match. And, you know, maybe I can always talk with you offline, Joanna, but like, I think pairing perhaps the pavilion with the shelter with other types of projects, because I know Partif typically likes to see 3 recreation projects, you know, individual recreation components to their project. And those 3 things need to be accessible. So as in, you know, anyone can get to them. So that's just something to keep in mind. Any other thoughts or questions? What are some challenges you're having getting to shovel ready? Doug, I see your face. I know you've got a lot of experience in implementing projects. Do you have any thoughts on what your challenges have been and how you've overcome?
Let me shut my door. I think the biggest challenge we're seeing right now is we've got some projects in the hopper, and everybody's got so much money to spend that our designers that we've been working with, at least here locally, are so far backlogged that trying to get something ready for say the next 6 to 10 months is really more like 12 to 18 months before it's going to be ready. And then I'd say the second biggest problem we have is dealing with inflationary stuff, where maybe we were awarded something last year at a value, and then you find yourself trying to fill the void of what that inflationary cost went from. So say like we just had like a little park that we got some funding on last year was 125,000. Well, that 125,000 quickly became almost 225,000. And so how do you get that award, but then how do you move forward with the budget that you got from last year in this year's inflationary measures? So those have probably been the two toughest challenges we've been trying to kind of grapple with here.
Yeah, Doug, I'm so glad you mentioned that. I think that's actually one of the hottest topics that we should have touched on is funding inflation and the issues a lot of folks are facing. Spencer, do you want to address what we've been doing? And also, like, I think a lot of grants funders are now requiring you to show what are you doing to prove that you have accurate funding costs and stuff like that.
Yeah, so federal funding especially, right? NCDOT will tell you we won't come back and fill in the pot if there's a shortfall, right? So I think we're being extra careful with cost estimates. We were always careful in the past, but we're really looking at the latest bid tabulations to really check what the latest unit rates are. You have to think about also, a lot of your typical engineers will not look at this, and we do, is really looking at the type of project, right? You can't just pick up the unit rate from a highway project and use it for a trail project. And some folks do that. It just doesn't work, right? It's a different scale. There's different contractors that will be bidding on your work. So you have to be sensitive to that. And then finally on escalation, right? So we've been doing at least 7.5% escalation on our cost estimates for the last couple of years, just because of what the rate of inflation has been, and where the grant programs will allow, like making sure that we add some adequate contingencies too. So it's better if a project comes in, way under what you budgeted than if it comes over, obviously. So those are some of the things we've been working on.
I see that some people are needing to get off, and we'll probably go for another 10 minutes. But Brad, maybe you just jump in with me. Do you want to do your last slides, and we can continue to talk? And then the link I send, I think if you just wouldn't mind filling that out like a minute or two after you jump off, just any thoughts you have on funding sources, and continue to have a conversation here. Anyone else having any kind of funding issues or funding gaps, and they really want to get some group input on some ideas on that? How about funding sources that you do find that have been really beneficial to you that you'd be willing to share with the group? I know sometimes it's like having your own pot of honey. You want to hide it in the forest, not always share. But have you all found some other grant sources that have been beneficial to you? I will point out, Noah did confirm that Dogwood Health is still doing the Catalyst grant writing. So
yeah, and they've been really helpful. Just to chime in with Dogwood's work, we've used them before where we've actually written the grant on things, and then just used their grant writers to help kind of proofread and give us some tips. So they've been really good to work with, and good funders. They still have some of their matching dollars on grants too. So if you're looking at a grant, I would encourage you to have a conversation with them to match.
there's one other thing I wanted to mention about cost estimates is if you're doing planning level cost estimates, you need to really make sure that you've padded those greatly, and also to make sure that if it's even a year out to date, you really probably need cost estimate updates for any type of project you're going to grant application with. So just keep those things in mind and know that you might need to get some help on that.
And then on grant programs, like just to mention something really quickly, right? I mentioned Safe Streets for All. And that's maybe a source that if you're planning your active transportation network, you haven't seen before, and you might not see the connection, right? But the next round of Safe Streets for All planning grants, right? The grant application is due July 10th. And it's a really simple application. You might not even need a consultant. You do need to reach out to your local government and your MPO or RPO if you have one, right? But and what that basically does is to do a safety plan for your whole community, whether it's just the municipality, the county, or the region. You can talk to your local government folks and figure that out, right? But there's so much funding available right now that we're hearing that if you submit a grant application and there's no blatant errors, that you'll get funded, right? And you can easily get, 50, 100,000 plus to do a safety plan for your community. So we're really encouraging everybody to look at Safe Streets for All and apply. July 10th is the deadline. So go check it out.
And Spencer, will Safe Streets for All be kind of an annual grant program for the next several years?
Correct. It's funded for the next 4 years at a minimum. But right now, you basically, the story behind it is that you cannot get the funding to build something if you don't have a safety plan in place, right? So, and nobody has a safety plan. Most communities across the US don't. So that's why there's so much funding for it right now. And if you apply, you're very likely to get it.
One last, it's not a huge funding source, but I just think it's a really neat funding source, is something called RETCAR, and it's a revitalization Cherokee resources or something like that. But if you look it up online, it's RTCAR, I believe. But that is really basically something that helps both with a native cane restoration. So if you have projects along rivers and you want to help restore the waterfront, and especially if there's already native cane there, they'll help with that. But the other one is also helping kind of implement art as related to Cherokee crafts and the different types of things they do. So an example of that is Buncombe County is getting funding through that to do a huge mural on the side of their parking garage that looks like a basket weave of the Cherokee. So there's just some really neat smaller pockets of funding that you can find to help really make your project unique and interesting and help interpret some of the heritage tourism, the natural tourism, heritage or natural aspects of the region. So Noah, do you want to chime in on the hometown grants? Is that
Oh,
something?
sorry, that was me.
Brad.
Noah and I are sharing the same image.
Okay.
I found this, I think I shared this grant opportunity a couple months ago, but it's the T-Mobile Hometown Revitalization Grants Program. And there were a couple counties in Western North Carolina received grants for this. I think they were commercial corridor, like buildings on Main Street, facade redevelopments, but they do all sorts of placemaking projects. So I think it's, again, thinking of this connectivity, the connectivity of Main Street to the outdoor assets or the parks, I think is a huge thing to think about here for that grant.
Well, no.
Oh.
Do you want to share your last slides, and then we can stay on the call for a little bit longer if people want to.
Would you mind putting in the chat, Kim, the last grant you were just talking about?
Yeah, let me do that.
And I'll share I'll do the closing slides. Let's see. Okay, well, yeah, this was a wonderful, just a lot of information, right, about funding and including our grant program that we are in the process of launching. We launched it a couple of weeks ago, and I think our grant program is really what's unique about this Building Outdoor Communities Planning and Capacity Building Grant Program. It could really be the seed funding for these conceptual designs, feasibility, initial planning, in order to get you all to these other bigger federal or state funding sources. So that's kind of the intention there. But I just wanted to point out, we have one other webinar coming up in June for our series here, and that our colleagues, Professor Whitehead and Morgan, from the Center for Economic Research and Policy Analysis are going to be giving us a download of their survey that they launched to 2,000 people a couple months ago. They've received incredible results, and they're in the middle of creating economic impact strategies and analyses for each county in Western North Carolina. They're on the academic calendar, so that they're not going to have the full plans until the fall, but they have an initial analysis that they're going to present in June. And then I also just wanted to, remind you, I know you all are probably seeing the emails with this. We had for the Outdoor Economy Conference, the early bird phase one ended May 1st, but there's still another early bird tier 2 that goes until July 1st. So I think, the funding topic is going to be a really great topic at the conference when we're thinking about building vibrant outdoor communities. So I really appreciate you all being here. It's just so interesting to learn from all the different resources and assets across the Western North Carolina. It's fun to learn from each other. We really appreciate Kim and Spencer's knowledge, and I think this is a conversation that we're going to keep coming back to as we move through this process. So thank you. And we can stay on a little longer if anyone else has any questions.
I did mention I would send a link to the presentation, which I can do shortly, but also perhaps there's a way, I don't know if we'll send any follow-up, we could send it that way too, but I'll try to send this link last thing before we close out to the presentation and all the resources we mentioned.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We appreciate everyone's time. This has been great to see your faces and appreciate you joining.
Have a great week, everyone. And congrats to Joanna, Volunteer of the Year in Clay County. See you Wednesday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Bradley. See you then.
Okay.